So I have the power jack inverter mounted to my wall, and I installed these NEMA L620 receptacles and plugs to make it easy to convert the well pump from the grid power, disconnect it from that, and connect it up to the inverter. My 24 volt nominal battery bank made from Nissan Leaf modules is able to run the inverter and well pump at least when it's fully charged. After getting everything ready, I enlisted my assistants to draw down the pressure reservoir and trigger the well pump, and everything worked great the first time. The lithium battery voltage only sagged about half a volt, and it was providing 85 amps at 23 volts, or about 2,000 watts to the inverter while the pump was running. The output of the inverter showed an initial high current surge, but then it settled down to about a 10 amp draw at 240 volts. The power factor on this well pump is only 73%, but I'm not too worried about that overall efficiency hit. Unfortunately, after the first time ran successfully, the second time it tried to start up the well pump, it blew a fuse. And then I had another fuse blow. So eventually I went to Lowe's, and these are 15 amp fuses. I bought a new different 15 amp fuse that's a microwave fuse, and so far that fuse has not blown. However, it just transferred the problem to my DC circuit breaker. After the inverter draws more than 200 amps for multiple seconds, that DC circuit breaker flips off. So the inverter output displays that the well pump is drawing more than 5,000 watts for multiple seconds, and I verified this with a power sight meter. So for whatever reason, the well pump is drawing a lot of current, the inverter is drawing a lot of current, but the well pump is just not starting up. I'm relatively certain that this failure to start up is due to the low input voltage, about 22, 23 volts on the input side. I'm a little disappointed because the battery bank is sourcing more than 5,000 watts to the inverter for multiple seconds, but I'm not terribly surprised, as this inverter is meant to be used with lead-acid batteries, and its input range is a little bit higher than the lithium-ion batteries I'm using. So if you remember my advice to people in the battery selection video, if you're trying to follow along after me, you probably just want to use 4 golf cart batteries. So these are 6 volt GC2 golf cart batteries. You put 4 of them in series, and you'll get a battery bank that has a fully charged voltage of around 27 volts, and then it'll go down to about 23, 22 volts when it's discharged. So my lithium-ion battery bank uses a set of 6 cells in series, and each cell has an absolute maximum voltage rating of 4.2 volts. I don't like charging them that high, but that's what the manufacturer says is their absolute top maximum. And so that's only 25.2 volts when it's fully charged, and it goes down to about 21 volts when it's down at the level I'd like to stop discharging it. So this is at the lower end of the range that this inverter claims to be its acceptable input voltage. So a 7S, or 7 cells in series, pack would make a much closer match to the range that this inverter is expecting. The problem with doing that with Nissan Leaf modules is that each of these modules has 2 cells in series already, and so you'd have to stop using half of your last module. Also, the center terminal here, the sense terminal, is not designed for high current draw, and so I would be very worried about trying to pull several hundred amps out of that center terminal, because it's really designed just for the BMS to sense the voltage difference in the middle of these 2 cells that are in series. However, all is not lost. My system is still going to work, because I never intended for this small battery bank to power the inverter and the well for long periods of time. In my driveway, I have a Chevy S10 pickup truck, which I've converted to use Nissan Leaf battery packs modules. They're in a 120 to 130 volt configuration there. So I bought this Meanwell power supply. It's an SD500H24, and what it does is it takes a DC input in the range of 72 to 144, so basically the 120 to 130 from my truck's DC battery pack, and steps it down to 24 volts at 20 amps, so it's about 500 watts. Now 20 amps of output isn't enough to run the inverter when the well pump's going, because that's more like 80 amps with surges up to a couple hundred, but it'll keep it topped up between the intermittent runs of my well pump. So with this, my truck's 24 kilowatt hour battery bank can power the whole house for quite a while.